Look, I wasn't planning on making this video. I tried to not talk about quote-unquote internet drama, but this time around I felt like I had to. For those of you who don't know, good god are you guys lucky. Ever since the Chainsaw Man anime wrapped up, there has been this festering wave of negativity and ridicule aimed at both the anime and its director. This negativity plagues any and all discussions about the adaptation, and recently it has reared its ugly head again, and oh boy, let me tell you, it's uglier than ever. The release of the, quite frankly, breathtaking trailer for the upcoming Chainsaw Man movie was unfortunately accompanied by a renewed dismissal of the anime and everything it managed to accomplish artistically. Not only are people refusing to appreciate the ridiculous production value Season 1 featured, they are going out of their way to hate on everything about it. Of course, a lot of it is happening over on Twitter, where most bad things tend to happen, but it's not limited to that site. Comments on YouTube, Instagram, and basically every other social media is filled with hatred. You might have come across online petitions asking for the removal of series director Yu Nakayama with thousands of signatures. You might have come across a series of YouTube videos with provocative titles about the subject. It's everywhere and it's ridiculous. Some fans are going out of their way to hate on everything Ryu Nakayama produces post Chainsaw Man, which is it's the epitome of being a loser. It's prime jobless activity. Please feel the touch of a consenting woman as soon as possible, although I'm afraid it might be a bit too late for some of you. Point is, people are treating the first season of Chainsaw Man and director Ryu Nakayama in a manner that is far removed from the concept of criticism. It's just them being pricks. And I know what you might be thinking. Anime fans having stupid, disrespectful opinions about the subject of animation, how is that a new thing? It happens all the time. There are an n number of creative shows and episodes that got hated on for looking different. How is this Chainsaw Man situation any different? Well, I'll explain. The difference is that most of the hating this time around isn't being done by the casual fan. Fans who don't know anything about the subject of animation but run their mouths anyway. It's being done by people who are otherwise well-informed and nuanced. It's being done by actual industry professionals, well, semi-professionals, and it's being done by fans who claim to value artistic freedom and creativity. That's the difference. Now, before I dive into this topic, I need to make one thing clear. The people I'm talking about are a part of a vocal minority. That's always the case, whether it's Attack on Titan or Jujutsu Kaisen or Chainsaw Man, it's always a vocal minority that leads to drama. I'm sure said minority would love to believe that they represent the entire fanbase, that the entire fanbase hates the anime the same way they do, but that's simply not true, and I'll prove it to you. We can safely assume that more than half of the anime viewers haven't read the manga. Regardless of how popular a manga is, most people are usually anime only, especially overseas. These people obviously wouldn't have a problem with the way the anime approached the source material because they aren't familiar with the source material in question. Removing them from the equation leaves us with the manga readers, and that's already a minority, but within that group, a large number of people simply don't care about the concept of direction. Many manga readers simply want to see their favorite panels colored in, which is a shame, but it's true. So they're gone. That leaves us with a tiny amount of fans who have read the manga and care about the way the anime is directed. But that's not all. You can't assume that everybody who fits this criteria hates the anime. I can assure you that's not the case. Why am I so sure? Because I myself am a manga reader who cares about the way an anime is directed, and I love Chainsaw Man Season 1. I wouldn't change a thing about it direction-wise. And there are others like me. On top of that, there are people who don't necessarily love Nakayama's approach, but they don't hate it either. Removing all of them from the aforementioned equation leaves us with a minuscule amount of people, or in other words, leaves us with a vocal minority. Also, I'm sure some of you would love to believe that it was your collective outrage that led to Nakayama's departure, but I'm 99% sure that's not the case. You don't leave a project, start your own studio, and pick up a series of small works all in the span of a year or two. That stuff takes time. Nakayama was probably contracted for a single season, meaning his departure was pre-planned, at least I think it was. I have no sources, but it seems unlikely that a vocal minority crying about a director's work would lead to such a drastic production overhaul, that too in such a short period of time. With all that out of the way, let's clarify a few things. This video is not about which approach is superior, mainly because there is no such thing as a superior approach. It's just the approach you like like and the approach you don't. This video isn't about the approach I personally prefer either, mainly because as of right now I love both. I'm sure the movie will look better and more consistent by virtue of it being a movie, aka having a shorter runtime and a longer production period. But when it comes to the actual directorial vision, I'm fine with either. This video is mainly about the way fans are behaving. Also, for the sake of my own sanity, I'll ignore the casual fans for now and focus on the people who, at least to a degree, know what they are talking about. Make sense? Let's go. A while back, I made this tweet which has aged like the finest of wine, so much so that I'll read it verbatim. In quotes, "We love creativity and artistic idiosyncrasies, but only when said creativity falls in line with our preconceived, narrow-minded notion of what creativity is." Good God, I was cooking, wasn't I? Basically, some fans claim to love creativity and artistic expression, but what they truly love is their own personal brand of it. Anything that strays away from their own personal preference is met with dismissal and ridicule. Funny thing is, that tweet wasn't even about Chainsaw Man. If I remember correctly, it was about Jujutsu Kaisen. So it's not a phenomena unique to Chainsaw Man, it happens all the time. You know what the worst part of all of it is? The reception to the anime wasn't this negative back when it was airing. I was actively interacting with the fan base at the time, so I would know. The fan reception went from, "Oh, this wasn't what I had personally envisioned and I'm not the biggest fan, but I can appreciate the effort that went into this project," to "Nakayama's direction is an affront to Tatsuki Fujimoto's work," to "The direction ruined Chainsaw Man," to "Nakayama's direction wasn't even all that, he just used a bunch of wide shots," to "The Chainsaw Man anime was pretentious slop and everything about it sucked," to "Nakayama shouldn't be allowed to work as a director anymore." All of those, by the way, were real remarks I came across at one point or another. There was also a guy who compared Nakayama to a certain Austrian with a funny mustache, but I'll assume that was tongue-in-cheek. Basically, the initial reception to the show wasn't this negative, but over time, the discontent held by some continued to fester in a vicious echo chamber. The critiques aimed at the anime and Nakayama continued to get more severe to the point where it stopped being critiques and ventured into the hurtful insults territory, which is never okay. The alleged animation nerds and their snide quips aren't any better either. By celebrating the removal of Nakayama from his role and by heavily implying that he shouldn't be allowed to direct anymore, you are doing the same things you rightfully chastise others for. In my mind, there's no difference between you and that one moron who said Tetsuya Nishio shouldn't be allowed to design characters anymore because he didn't like the way Kaiju 8 looked. You're doing the same thing, you're just more articulate and less direct about it. Mocking the works of many artists, not just Nakayama, simply because his approach doesn't line up with your own personal preference is not a good thing to do. I know, shocking. And you might counter my point by saying something along the lines of, "Oh, some of the Chainsaw Man team didn't agree with Nakayama's approach either." But to that I say, what of it? It's called creative differences. It happens. Especially when you gather that many creative people under one metaphorical roof, it's bound to happen. That doesn't mean the director should abandon his idea and turn the project into a Wild West, anything goes free for all. That approach can lead to spectacular results, yes, just look at Mob Psycho, but that doesn't mean that's the only path a project should take. Blah blah blah, creativity good, and creativity can be expressed not just by the animators but also at a directorial level. Throwing around words like soulless when referring to art created by human hands is the most despicable thing you can do, and yet many don't think twice about doing so. It's genuinely unfortunate. The Chainsaw Man movie trailer brought out the worst of this mentality, and it was really upsetting to see. Manga readers calling the anime unfaithful despite most of it being one-to-one panel recreations, animation nerds hating on it despite it being one of the most technically impressive shows in recent memory, cracks and all, and the entire fan base blowing the alleged negatives way out of proportion. It was upsetting. Seriously, people make it seem like Nakayama's approach completely crushed artistic expression, which simply wasn't the case. Hironori Tanaka's art still looked like Hironori Tanaka's art. Takuya Ninuma's art still looked like Takuya Ninuma's art. Hisashi Mori's animation still looked like Hisashi Mori's animation. Keiichiro Watanabe's animation still looked like Keiichiro Watanabe's animation. Shota Goshizono's episode still featured the volumetric, quirky, eye-catching direction that he's known for. The list goes on. The anime simply did not look as uniform and consistent as many of you have convinced convinced yourselves into believing. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And that's basically what I wanted to talk about. I hope this is the first and the last video I end up making about this subject, because let's be honest, it's depressing. You know what? Let's end this video on a positive note. Let's talk about Ryu Nakayama. What has he been up to? Because it's interesting, trust me. As many of you know, Nakayama started his own studio called Andraft, and the way this new studio is operating is interesting. Unlike Studio ENH Productions, founded by Jujutsu Kaisen director Sangwoo Park, Andraft is progressing slowly, making sure not to bite off more than they can chew. Park's studio took on way too much work all at once, despite lacking the talent and the infrastructure needed to execute them properly, leading to the second half of Ninja Kamui. The less said about it, the better. Andraft is going down a more traditional path. You see, studios don't produce entire shows right off the bat. Many companies spend years taking on outsourcing work and small projects before eventually working on something major, and Andraft is doing just that, all while building up its roster of young, new talent. And that, my friends, is promising. The studio produced the opening for the seasonal anime Amiku MD recently, and it looked incredible. The OP was directed by Nakayama himself, and it was pure eye candy. The photography and CG use in particular stood out to me, in a good way of course. I hope Nakayama continues to build his studio up and takes on a major project only when he and his studio are ready for it. The way I see it, Chainsaw Man fans, regardless of whether or not they like the first season, are winning because of how good the movie looks. And Ryu Nakayama fans like myself are winning as well, because the progression of his studio is really interesting. Let's all just move on, appreciate what's to come, and not disregard what we got in the past. That's the main takeaway from this honestly convoluted video. That's about it. Liked the video? Check out this other bit of content on screen. It's here, I'm getting used to it. Like and subscribe, and until next time.